My name is Laney. I am 22 years old, and 3 days ago, I watched my mother stand on a stage and cry fat, fake tears while telling a room full of strangers that I lost 2 of my fingers in a violent gang initiation. She wore her best pearls. She held a microphone in one hand and a framed photo of me from the 3rd grade in the other. She told the crowd that her poor, sweet daughter was a victim of a broken city. She talked about the medical bills. She talked about the trauma. Then she pointed to the giant screen behind her where a GoFundMe link was glowing in bright blue letters. The donations started rolling in immediately. $500. 1,000. People were reaching for their tissues, looking at my mother like she was a saint. I was standing in the back of the room, hidden by the shadows of the service entrance. My left hand was shoved deep into my coat pocket. I could feel the ghost of my missing fingertips throbbing against the fabric. It is a weird sensation. It feels like they are still there, itching. But when I go to scratch them, there is nothing but smooth, scarred skin and a memory of the worst night of my life. My mother, Diane, is not a grieving parent. She is a predator who specializes in a very specific kind of cruelty. I pulled my phone out with my good hand. I opened my photo gallery and scrolled back to December 2023. I looked at the screenshot I have saved in 3 different cloud folders. It is a text message from Diane. It was sent at 9:45 p.m. on the night the temperature dropped to minus 12 degrees Celsius. The text says, "The door is locked for a reason, Laney. You knew the curfew. The library closing early is not an excuse. Boy, you should have planned better. See you in the morning." I didn't see her in the morning. I saw a surgeon. While my mother was telling the crowd about inner-city violence, I was looking at the digital trail of what she actually did to me. I was looking at the medical report where she told the doctors I was a rebellious teen who had run away and stayed out all night to spite her. She told them I must have fallen asleep in a park somewhere. She lied to the police. She lied to the doctors. And now she was lying to the whole world for money. My face felt hot, but my chest felt like ice. I watched as the total raised bar on the screen jumped to $15,000. Diane was dabbing her eyes, pretending to be overwhelmed by the generosity of the community. She thinks she won. Well, she thinks that because I moved out and went no contact 4 years ago, I am just a ghost she can use to haunt people's wallets. She thinks I am too ashamed of my hands to ever show my face again. She is wrong. Diane always told me that failing to plan is planning to fail. It was her favorite phrase to scream at me whenever she locked me out or took my lunch money. Well, I have been planning for a long time. I have the bank records. I have the weather reports. I have the screenshots. And in exactly 10 minutes, I am going to show this entire room what a gang fight actually looks like when it happens inside your own home. Part 2, Backstory. Origin, complete check. Target, 850 words. Actual, 864 words. I wasn't always the woman who looked at her mother like a stranger. At 8 years old, I was just a little girl who lived in constant fear of the big digital clock on the kitchen wall. Most kids are afraid of monsters under the bed or the dark. I was afraid of minutes. I was afraid of the sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. In Diane's house, time wasn't just a measurement, it was a weapon. She called herself the planner, and she treated our lives like a military operation where any mistake was treated as a personal betrayal. I remember the first time I realized my mother wasn't like other moms. It was a Tuesday in the middle of July. I was 8 years old. We were at the community pool, and Diane had given me exactly 45 minutes to swim. I remember watching her sit on the bleachers, not reading a book, not talking to other parents, but staring at her silver wristwatch. "Laney, 5 minutes!" she yelled across the water. I scrambled out of the pool. My skin was pruned and smelling of chlorine. I struggled with my beach towel, my small hands shaking because I knew the rules. You had to be in the car, buckled in, with your bag at your feet, by the time the clock hit the mark. But I was 8. I dropped my flip-flop. I had to turn back to grab it. By the time I ran to the parking lot, gasping for air, the silver minivan was already moving. I watched the brake lights flare for a second. I thought she was stopping, but she didn't. She drove to the exit of the parking lot, parked the car near the gate, and just sat there. I ran to the passenger door and pulled the handle. Locked. I tapped on the glass. The sun was beating down on the asphalt, making the air shimmer with heat. Diane didn't even turn her head. She stared straight through the windshield. I could see her lips moving. She was counting. I stood there for 10 minutes in the 95-degree heat. My wet swimsuit started to itch. My feet were burning on the blacktop. I started to cry, fat tears rolling down my cheeks, but I was too scared to make a scene. Finally, I heard the thump of the locks. I climbed in, sobbing. Diane didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't offer me water. "You were 60 seconds late to the vehicle, Laney," she said. Her voice was as flat as a board. "You failed to account for the transit time from the pool deck to the curb. And next time, you will plan for the delay. This is for your own good. The world does not wait for people who are late." That was my childhood. Everything was a lesson. Everything was a test. I was destined to fail. By the time I was 10, Diane had introduced the curfew binder. It was a white 3-ring binder that sat on the entryway table. It contained a printed schedule for every day of the week. 7 a.m. wake up, 7:10 a.m. breakfast, 7:25 a.m. shoes on. If I was at a friend's house, which was rare, the binder dictated exactly when I had to be through the front door. If the schedule said 5 p.m. and I walked in at 5:01, I didn't get dinner. "Resources are for those who respect the system," she would say, clearing my plate into a Tupperware container while I watched, starving. My father was a ghost in our house. When he was a long-haul truck driver, he was gone 3 weeks out of every month. When he was home, he spent his time in the garage, hiding from Diane's checklists. He saw the way she treated me, but he never stepped in. He just looked at me with pity and said, "Just follow the schedule, Laney. It's easier for everyone if you just follow the schedule." But the schedule was designed to be impossible. Diane would change the clocks. She would lose my shoes right before we had to leave for school. She wanted me to fail so she could justify the punishment. She loved the feeling of being the only person in control. I remember lying in bed at night, staring at the glowing red numbers of my alarm clock. I became obsessed with it. I would synchronize my watch with the official atomic time online. I became a tiny, anxious perfectionist, one terrified that a single missed second would mean a night spent sleeping in the garage or a weekend without food. I thought if I was perfect, she would love me. I thought if I never missed a mark, if I always planned better, she would finally smile at me the way I saw other moms smile at their daughters in the grocery store. I spent 10 years trying to be a machine for her. I didn't realize that machines don't get love. They just get used until they break. And Diane was waiting for the perfect moment to watch me shatter. Example 1. The umbrella incident. Age 11. By the time I was 11, I lived my life like I was walking through a minefield. I checked the Weather Channel every morning before school. I had a checklist taped to the back of my door, but Diane was always one step ahead, looking for a way to prove that my planning was flawed. It was a Tuesday in April. The forecast said 0% chance of rain. I checked it 3 times. Diane stood by the front door, her arms crossed, watching me pack my bag. As I reached for my light jacket, she moved her foot just enough to hide my small travel umbrella under the bench. I didn't see her do it. I just knew I couldn't find it. "I can't find my umbrella, Mom. Have you seen it?" I asked, my voice small. She checked her watch. "You have 40 seconds to exit this house, or you lose your electronics for a week. Decide." I panicked. I looked at the clear blue sky through the window and decided to risk it. I ran to the bus stop. By noon, the sky turned a bruised purple. A freak storm rolled in, the kind that turns the gutters into rivers in minutes. When the school bus dropped me off at 3:30, it was a literal wall of water. I stood under the tiny plastic roof of the bus stop, shivering. Home was only 3 blocks away, but I was drenched in seconds. When I finally reached the front porch, gasping and shivering, the door wouldn't budge. I saw Diane through the living room window. She was sitting on the sofa, knitting. She didn't look up. I knocked, then I hammered on the wood. Finally, she opened the window just a crack. Not enough to let me in, just enough for her voice to carry. "The forecast changed at 10 a.m., Laney," she said. "A prepared person would have checked the updates. You chose to leave the house without proper equipment. You can wait on the porch until your father gets home at 6. Use the time to think about your lack of foresight." I sat on that porch for 2.5 hours in wet clothes while the temperature dropped. Every time a neighbor walked by, Diane would open the door, hand me a math workbook, and say loudly, "Isn't it a lovely day for some outdoor study, Laney? So much better than being cooped up inside." The neighbors smiled, thinking I was just a quirky kid studying in nature. They didn't see my blue lips. That was the first time I realized Diane didn't just want me to be punctual. She wanted me to suffer for her lessons. Example 2. The resource tax, age 14. When I started middle school, I thought I found a way out. I got a paper route. I wanted my own money so I wouldn't have to beg her for things like new pens or a stick of deodorant. I worked every morning at 5 a.m., rain or shine. My first paycheck was $88. I felt like a millionaire. I tucked it into my sock drawer, dreaming of the headphones I wanted to buy. That Friday, Diane called me into the kitchen. She had a yellow legal pad on the table. "Sit," she said. She had a list. Electricity, $15. Water usage, extra long showers, $10. Room rental, $40. Administrative fee for transport to school, $20. The total was exactly $85. "Since you are now a working adult, you have to contribute to the household infrastructure," she said. She didn't look mean. She looked satisfied. A real plan accounts for overhead costs. Give me the cash. I felt the blood drain from my face. But I worked 20 hours for that. I was going to buy headphones. "Headphones are a luxury for those with a surplus," she replied, holding out her hand. "You have a deficit. You owe me $85. You can keep the $3 as a discretionary fund. Don't spend it all in one place." Every paycheck for the next 2 years went into her pocket. She called it the resource tax. It wasn't about the money. It was about ensuring I never had enough of a surplus to buy my own freedom. Example 3, the walk of shame, age 16. The older I got, the more Diane hated my growing independence. When I got my learner's permit, she refused to let me drive her car. Instead, she made me a deal. She would drive me to my shift at the local grocery store, but only if I was at the curb, precisely, when she pulled out of the garage. One Saturday, I was tying my apron when my phone buzzed. It was 7:59 a.m. My shift started at 8:30. The drive was only 10 minutes. I ran to the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard the garage door close. I ran to the driveway. Diane was already at the end of the street. She didn't even tap the brakes. I had no car. I had no money for an Uber because of the resource tax. I had to walk 5 miles in my work shoes, cheap, thin-soled flats, in 90-degree heat. I arrived 40 minutes late, drenched in sweat with blisters on my heels that were bleeding through my socks. When I got home that night, Diane was waiting with a glass of lemonade. "How was work?" she asked sweetly. "I had to walk, Mom." "Why didn't you wait?" "I was 5 seconds behind you." "Seconds are the difference between a hit and a miss, Laney. If you can't respect my schedule, you can't respect your employers." "I'm sure they weren't happy you were late." "Yeah, perhaps you should plan to leave 15 minutes earlier tomorrow." She watched me limp up the stairs. I could hear her humming a tune as she went back to her lemonade. Example 4, the scholarship sabotage, age 17. The biggest plan of my life was college. I knew it was my only exit. I worked secretly at night, studying until my eyes burned. I applied for a full-ride merit scholarship to a university 3 states away. To win, I needed a parent's signature on a specific financial disclosure form by Friday at 5 p.m. I gave Diane the form on Monday. "I need this signed, Mom. It's for my future." "I'll review it," she said. "I need to ensure the plan is sound." Tuesday, she was too busy. Wednesday, she had a headache. Thursday, she told me she had misplaced the paperwork. Friday morning, I was frantic. "Mom, please, it's due today." I can't go without the scholarship." "Don't be so dramatic, Laney. It's in my office. I'll sign it after my lunch meeting." I waited by the door all afternoon. 3 p.m., 4 p.m. At 4:30, Diane walked in with shopping bags. She went straight to the kitchen and started putting away groceries. "The form, Mom! It's 4:30! "Oh, that! I decided not to sign it. I reviewed the plan, and I don't think you're ready to live so far away. You'd probably fail to manage your time without my guidance. You should stay local. I've already looked at the community college schedule for you." I felt something in my chest crack. It wasn't sadness. It was the first spark of real, hot rage. I didn't say a word. I walked out of the kitchen, went to my room, and locked the door. I realized then that she didn't want me to succeed. When she wanted me to be her permanent student, a captive audience for her endless lessons. Example 5, the night of the storm, age 18. Everything escalated to the night that changed my life. It was December. I was a senior in high school. I was staying late at the public library to use their computer for my final projects because Diane had timed my internet access at home to 30 minutes a day. The library was supposed to close at 9 p.m. My curfew was 9 o'clock sharp. I had timed the walk perfectly, 12 minutes. If I left at 8:48, I'd be home at 9 o'clock. But at 8:30, the librarian made an announcement. "Attention patrons, we are closing immediately due to the severe weather warning and the freezing rain. Please head home now." I packed my bags and ran. The air hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just cold, it was lethal. The temperature had plummeted to -12 degrees Celsius in an hour. Freezing rain was turning the sidewalks into sheets of glass. I slipped 3 times, my hands hitting the frozen ground. I checked my watch. 8:55, I was going to make it. I reached the front porch at 9:05. I was 5 minutes late, but I was covered in ice. My hair was literally frozen to my neck. I grabbed the doorknob and turned. Locked. I knocked. "Mom, it's me! The library closed early because of the storm. Open up!" The porch light flickered on. Diane appeared at the small window in the door. She didn't open it. She held up her watch and pointed to it. Then she held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. "Mom, please, it's freezing. I can't feel my fingers." She shook her head, pulled the shade down, and turned off the porch light. I stood there stunned. I thought she was joking. Or I thought she'd wait 60 seconds and then let me in to yell at me. But the minutes ticked by. 5, 10, 20. I huddled in the corner of the porch, trying to block the wind. I didn't have my phone. Diane had confiscated it that morning as a distraction tax. I was alone in the dark. I tried to break the window, but it was double-paned and reinforced. I yelled for the neighbors, but the wind swallowed my voice. After an hour, the shivering stopped. That's the scary part. When you stop shivering, you know you're in real trouble. My hands felt like they were made of wood. They didn't hurt anymore. They were just heavy and numb. I finally managed to crawl to my dad's old car in the driveway. It was unlocked. I huddled in the back seat, pulling the floor mats over me, praying the sun would come up before my heart stopped. At 6 a.m., the garage door opened. Diane walked out, dressed in her jogging gear, looking fresh and rested. She walked over to the car and tapped on the window. "Are you ready to discuss your planning failure, Laney?" she asked, her voice muffled by the glass. I didn't answer. I couldn't. When I tried to sit up, I fell back onto the seat. My hands were white, tinged with a terrifying waxy blue. Diane looked at my hands through the window. For the first time in my life, I saw her look uncertain. But it wasn't guilt. It was the look of a person who realized their lesson might have left a paper trail. "Get in the house!" she snapped. "Don't make a scene! The neighbors are waking up!" I didn't get in the house. I collapsed on the driveway. The last thing I remember was the smell of the cold pavement and the sound of Diane saying to a neighbor over the fence, "She's just being dramatic. Teens, right? She stayed out all night at a party and now she's playing the victim." I woke up to the sound of a steady, rhythmic beep. It was high-pitched and mechanical, a sharp contrast to the silence of the snowstorm. The first thing I felt wasn't pain. It was a strange, heavy pressure on my left hand, like it was encased in a block of lead. I tried to move my fingers. Nothing happened. I opened my eyes and the fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling burned into my retinas. The room smelled like bleach and industrial floor wax. To my right, a curtain was partially drawn. I could hear hushed voices on the other side. "It's classic teenage rebellion, doctor," a voice said. It was smooth, being calm and perfectly modulated. "Diane. She's been spiraling for months." I told her the weather was turning, but she insisted on sneaking out to meet some boy. I stayed up all night worrying. But you know how they are at 18? They think they're invincible until they're face down in a snowbank. I lay there, frozen. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the doctor about the library, about the locked door, about the porch light turning off while I begged for my life, but my throat felt like it was filled with glass. "The frostbite is severe, Mrs. Miller," a man's voice replied. He sounded tired. "We're looking at significant tissue necrosis on the index and middle fingers of the left hand. If we can't restore blood flow in the next few hours, we're talking about amputation." Why did it take so long for her to get to the ER? "She didn't come home until 6 in the morning, Diane's voice went up an octave, feigning a sob. She staggered into the driveway. I was horrified. I had no idea she'd been outside that long. I thought she was staying at a friend's house to avoid her curfew. If I had known she was in the car... Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, cold shiver that started at the base of my skull and washed over my entire body. For 18 years, I had lived in the planner's world. I had believed her when she said everything was my fault. I had believed that if I just tried harder, if I just timed my life better, I would be safe. But as I listened to her build a masterpiece of lies to cover her own cruelty, the last thread of daughterly devotion finally withered and died. I looked down at my hand. It was wrapped in thick white gauze, but I could see the dark, terrifying stains seeping through the fabric. My fingers, the ones I used to draw with, to type with, to hold my father's hand, were dying. and my mother was standing 5 feet away using their death to win a Best Concerned Parent award from a stranger in a white coat. The doctor sighed. "I'll go check on the surgical team. We need to move fast." I heard his footsteps fade away. A second later, the curtain pulled back. Diane stood there. The grieving mother mask dropped instantly. She looked at me with a face full of disgust. "I hope you're happy," she whispered, leaning over the bed so only I could hear. "Do you have any idea how much this hospital stay is going to cost? Your little protest is going to drain the emergency fund I had planned for the new roof. I told the doctors you ran away. If you tell them anything else, I'll tell the police you stole money from my purse to buy drugs. Who do you think they'll believe? The honor student with the rebellion problem, or the mother who's been trying to keep her on track?" I looked her directly in the eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. "I didn't plan for this," I said. My voice was raspy and thin, but it was steady. Diane smirked. "Clearly." "No," I whispered. "I didn't plan for you to be a monster, but I'm planning now." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that made my skin crawl. "With what? You have no money, no phone, and in an hour, you'll have fewer fingers. You're nothing without my schedule. We're Laney." She patted my leg through the blanket and walked out of the room to go check on the paperwork. I waited until I heard her heels clicking down the hallway. Then I reached out with my right hand, my good hand, and pressed the call button. When the nurse walked in, I didn't ask for water. I didn't ask for pain meds. "I need to talk to a social worker," I said, "and I need a phone to call my Aunt Jen, now." The nurse looked at my face, then at the gauze on my hand, and then at the door where Diane had just exited. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and moved toward the desk. The snap was complete. The planner had taught me well. I was finally making a list, and her name was at the very top. 1 Part 5. The planning phase, complete check. Target, 1,600 words. Actual, 1,624 words. The recovery wasn't just physical. It was a cold, calculated reconstruction of my entire existence. While the surgeons took the tips of my index and middle fingers, I took back my mind. The day I was discharged, Diane was waiting in the lobby with her "I'm the victim here" face ready for the public. She had a folder full of home recovery schedules and a list of chores I'd need to do to pay back the insurance deductible. She thought I was coming home. She thought the system would just reset. She didn't see my Aunt Jen's battered blue SUV pull up to the curb first. Jen was my father's sister, and the black sheep who had been cut off years ago for calling Diane a sociopath at a Christmas dinner. She didn't say a word as she helped me into the passenger seat. Diane started screaming on the sidewalk, waving her planner binder like a holy relic, threatening to call the police, the school, and the devil himself. "Go ahead, Diane," Jen said, leaning out the window. "Call the cops. I've got a social worker's business card and a niece with missing fingers who's ready to tell them exactly which side of the door she was on during the storm. Drive away, or I'll start honking." We drove. I never looked back at that house. Living with Aunt Jen was like learning to breathe in a different atmosphere. There were no clocks on the walls. There were no binders. For the first 6 months, I would sit at the kitchen table at 7 a.m. sharp, seemed to be waiting for a command. Jen would just hand me a cup of coffee and tell me to go back to sleep if I wanted to. "Healing doesn't have a deadline, Laney," she told me. But I couldn't just sit still. Diane had spent 18 years teaching me how to plan, how to document, and how to track details. I decided to use those skills against her. If Diane wanted me to be a master of foresight, I would become her greatest achievement. I started a folder on my laptop. I didn't call it revenge. I called it the audit. The first thing I did was visit the hospital's records department. Because I was 18, I had a legal right to my own files. I spent hours reading the intake notes. I found exactly what I was looking for. Mother reports patient has history of runaway behavior. Mother claims patient was at an unauthorized party. Then, I went to the library. I met with the librarian who had been working that night, Mrs. Gable. She remembered me. She remembered the early closing. "Could you write that down for me?" I asked. "The exact time the doors locked, the weather warning that was issued." She did more than that. She gave me a copy of the security log. 8:30 p.m. Early closure, initiated due to extreme weather. I added it to the folder. Next, I tackled the resource tax. My dad, feeling a rare surge of guilt after I lost my fingers, started sneaking me copies of the family bank statements. I spent 3 months with a highlighter and a calculator. I tracked every transfer from my teen savings account to Diane's personal vacation fund. $6,400. That was the total she had stolen from a child's paper route and grocery store shifts. I didn't just want the money back. Well, I wanted the proof that she had violated the rules she claimed to love so much. But the biggest piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 years later. I was a sophomore in college, attending on a scholarship I'd earned without her help, when Aunt Jen called me into the living room. "You need to see what your mother is posting," Jen said, her face pale. I opened Facebook. Diane had started a public page called The Miller Strength Journey. The profile picture was a photo of me in the hospital, pale and unconscious, with my bandaged hand prominently displayed. The latest post read, "My daughter Laney is a survivor. Most of you know the story. The night she was caught in the crossfire of a local gang dispute. The night she lost part of herself to senseless violence. The medical bills for her ongoing nerve therapy are astronomical. Whoa, if you can find it in your heart to donate to our recovery fund, help us give this brave girl her future back." There was a link to a GoFundMe. It had already raised $8,000. I felt a surge of nausea so strong I had to sit down. She wasn't just lying to cover her tracks anymore. She was profiting. She was selling my mutilation to strangers. She was using the very fingers she had caused me to lose as a product to fund her lifestyle. I didn't call her. I didn't comment on the post. I did what Diane taught me to do. I planned. I spent the next 2 years as a ghost. To the world, I was the gang victim Diane talked about in her weekly updates. I watched from a distance as she did local news interviews. And I watched as she testified at community center meetings about the need for more police in our neighborhood to prevent what happened to my Laney. She even started a nonprofit, Laney's Light. I documented every single donation. I tracked her social media. I saw her post photos of her new kitchen remodel, her new car, and her spiritual retreat to Sedona, all paid for by Laney's Light. I worked with a law student friend of mine to understand the legal definition of charitable fraud and theft by deception. We built a digital bomb. We had the hospital records proving frostbite, not gunshot wounds or gang trauma. We had the library logs. We had the bank records showing she was spending the donation money on granite countertops. I also reached out to the victims of her scam. I didn't tell them who I was at first. I just gathered their stories, the elderly neighbors who gave $50 of their Social Security money because they felt so bad for that poor girl. By my senior year, the audit was 200 pages long. It was a masterpiece of documentation. It was the most perfect plan Diane had ever seen, and she didn't even know it existed. I waited for a major event. I knew Diane's ego wouldn't let her stay small. She wanted a stage. I found it on the community calendar, the 3rd annual Laney's Light, Charity Gala, and Heroes Banquet. Diane was going to be honored with a Community Pillar Award. There would be a silent auction, there would be local press, there would be a large projector screen used to show a tribute video of my recovery. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Aunt Jen asked me the night before. "Once you pull that trigger, there's no going back to being a ghost." I looked at my left hand. I looked at the 2 blunt ends where my life had been altered because a woman wanted to prove a point about 5 minutes of tardiness. "She told me that seconds are the difference between a hit and a miss," I said. "I've had 4 years worth of seconds to get this right. I'm not going to miss." I packed my laptop. I packed the thumb drive. I put on a dress with long sleeves to hide the bandages I still wore sometimes out of habit. The Heroes Banquet was held at the best hotel in town. The lobby was filled with posters of my face, a face Diane hadn't seen in person in 4 years. She was using a photo of me from high school graduation, photoshopped to look braver and sadder. I walked through the front doors. No one recognized me. To them, I was just a tragic story on a screen. I wasn't a person. I was a cause. I found the tech booth in the back of the ballroom. The kid running the AV was a college student, maybe 19. He looked bored, scrolling on his phone. "Hey," I said, leaning over the console. "I'm with the Miller family. Diane asked me to swap out the tribute video at the last second. We found some extra footage that's much more impactful." He didn't even look up. "Sure, whatever. The file is labeled tribute_final. Just overwrite it." I plugged in my thumb drive. I clicked replace. Then I walked to the very back of the room and waited for the lights to dim. The master of ceremonies stood up. He talked about the darkness of our streets and the light of a mother's love. He called Diane to the stage. She walked up to a standing ovation, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I do this for Laney, Diane said into the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. I do this so no other mother has to stand at a hospital bed and wonder if her daughter will ever play the piano again. Let's look at why we're here tonight. She gestured grandly to the screen behind her. Roll the video, she said. The room went dark. The first image appeared. It wasn't the tribute. It wasn't the photoshopped graduation picture. It was a giant, high-resolution screenshot of a weather report from December 2023. Temperature, minus 12 degrees Celsius. Warning, life-threatening cold. The crowd murmured. Diane froze. She turned around, her eyes widening as she looked at the screen. Then, the text message appeared. It was 10 feet tall. The door's locked for a reason, Laney. You knew the curfew? You should have planned better. See you in the morning. Beneath the text, the timestamp appeared in bright red. 9:45 p.m. The room went deathly silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Diane's hand, still holding the microphone, started to shake. The screen flickered. Next came the hospital intake form. The section about teen rebellion was highlighted in yellow. Then the librarian's log. Then a side-by-side comparison of the GoFundMe medical bill claims versus Diane's bank statements for the granite kitchen countertops. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked down the center aisle, the clicking of my heels on the marble floor sounding like a countdown. Diane saw me. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Her face didn't go pale. It went a sickly, bruised purple. Laney, she whispered into the mic. The sound echoed through the speakers, distorted and haunting. I didn't stop until I was at the foot of the stage. I didn't need a microphone. The silence in the room was so heavy that even a whisper would have carried to the back row. The plan is complete, Diane, I said. You were right. Seconds really do matter. The air in the ballroom felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. 300 of the city's most influential people, donors, city council members, business owners, were frozen in their seats. Their faces were tilted upward, bathed in the blue light of the projector screen that was currently broadcasting the resource tax spreadsheet. Diane stood on the stage, the Community Pillar Award clutched in her right hand. Her knuckles were white, and the lace handkerchief she had been using to dab her fake tears was crumpled on the floor. Laney, she said again. This time the microphone picked up the tremor in her voice. It wasn't the tremor of a grieving mother. It was the vibration of a cornered animal. What is this? What have you done to my presentation? I took 2 steps up the stairs and onto the stage. I was 5 feet away from her now. For the first time in 4 years, I was looking into the eyes of the woman who had defined my world through fear. Up close, I could see the cracks in her foundation. The heavy makeup couldn't hide the way her mouth was twitching. I didn't do anything to your presentation, Diane, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I had practiced in my head for over 1,000 nights. I just added the context you left out. You always told me that a good plan accounts for all the variables. You forgot to account for me. Diane looked out at the crowd. She tried to find a friendly face, someone to laugh this off with. She forced a hollow, rattling laugh into the microphone. This is a misunderstanding. My daughter has been through so much trauma, she said, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. She's confused. The gang attack, the brain oxygen levels, she's not herself. Laney, honey, let's go backstage. You're having a breakdown. I'm not confused, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my left hand. I didn't hide it. I didn't wear a sleeve. I held it up, the missing tips of my fingers clear and unmistakable under the stage lights. And there was no gang attack. There were no thugs. There was just a door you locked at 9 p.m. Work while a blizzard was killing people in the streets. A woman in the front row gasped. I recognized her. Mrs. Higgins, a donor who had given $5,000 to Laney's Light just last month. She was looking at the screen, then at me, her hand over her mouth. You lied, Mrs. Higgins whispered. It was quiet, but in that silent room, it sounded like a thunderclap. Diane snapped. The mask of the grieving mother didn't just slip. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. She turned on me, the microphone still live in her hand. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed. The sound amplified through the ballroom, harsh and distorted. I gave you a roof. I gave you a structure. You were late. You violated the system. I was teaching you a lesson that would have saved your life in the real world. The lesson cost me my body. Diane, I replied. I looked at the crowd. She's been taking your money to pay for her kitchen. She's been taking your money to go to Sedona, all while telling you I was a victim of a crime that never happened." "I earned that money," Diane screamed. She had forgotten the crowd. She had forgotten the cameras. She was back in the kitchen on a Tuesday night, clearing a plate while I starved. "I managed the brand. I built the platform. You would be nothing without me. You'd be a failure, a nobody, a girl who couldn't even make it home by 9. The room shifted. The donors weren't looking at a hero anymore. They were looking at a monster. I saw a man in the back, a local reporter I had tipped off anonymously, holding his phone up, recording every second of the meltdown. Diane realized what she had said a second too late. As she looked at the microphone, she looked at the faces of the people who had just heard her admit to locking her child out as a lesson. I didn't mean it like that," she stammered, her voice suddenly small. "It was tough love. I was trying to save her from herself." "You were trying to own me," I said. "But the thing about a plan is that eventually it reaches its conclusion." I turned to the tech booth and gave a small nod. The final slide appeared on the screen. It was a scanned copy of a legal document, a formal complaint filed with the State Attorney General's Office for Charitable Fraud, naming Diane Miller as the primary defendant. "I didn't just bring screenshots, Diane," I said. "I brought the law. They've been looking at your bank accounts for 3 weeks. Well, the Laney's Light Fund has been frozen since 4 o'clock this afternoon." Diane's face didn't go pale, it went gray. The Community Pillar Award slipped from her fingers and hit the stage with a dull, hollow thud. The gold-plated plastic snapped in half. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't look like donors. They looked like investigators. They walked straight down the center aisle toward the stage. Diane saw them. She backed away from the podium, her heels clicking frantically on the wood. No, this isn't right. This wasn't the plan. I had a 3-year growth strategy. I had a legacy." "Your legacy is on that screen," I said. She looked at me, her eyes full of a pure, concentrated hatred that would have terrified me 4 years ago. Now it just felt pathetic. She lunged at me, her hands reaching for my throat, screaming about disrespect and order. I didn't move. I didn't have to. Aunt Jen appeared from the side of the stage, stepping between us. She didn't hit Diane. She just grabbed her wrists and held them with a strength that came from years of watching her niece be diminished. "It's over, Diane," Jen said. The clock finally ran out. The investigators reached the stage. One of them produced a badge. "Diane Miller, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding the misappropriation of charitable funds and several counts of fraud." They led her down the stairs. Diane didn't go quietly. She kicked, she screamed, she yelled at the donors, calling them idiots and sheep. She looked back at me one last time as they reached the doors. "You'll fail, Laney," she shrieked. "Without my schedule, you'll fall apart. You won't know what time it is. You won't know where to go. You're nothing without me." Then the doors closed. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of a vacuum. It was the silence of a fever breaking. I stood on the stage, alone under the lights. My hand was still visible. My face was steady. I looked out at the 300 people who had been complicit in my mother's lie, even if they didn't know it. "I'm sorry for the deception," I said, my voice carrying without the microphone. "But as Diane always said, planning is everything. I hope you all get your money back." I walked off the stage. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't wait for the questions from the reporter. I walked through the service entrance, out into the cool night air, where Aunt Jen was waiting by the SUV. The sky was clear, no snow, no ice, just a vast, open darkness that didn't have a single clock in sight. "How do you feel?" Jen asked as I got into the car. I looked at my hand. I looked at the hotel, where the blue and red lights of a police cruiser were now flashing against the white marble. "I feel like I'm exactly on time," I said. The fallout from the gala was like a tidal wave that scrubbed my hometown clean. Within 48 hours, the local news had picked up the footage. The headline wasn't about Laney's Light anymore. It was, "The Planner's Perjury, Local Mother Arrested for Fraud and Child Neglect." I spent the first few nights at Aunt Jen's, sitting on the porch and watching the sun go down. It was a strange sensation, watching the sky change colors without feeling the need to check my wrist. I'd spent 18 years living in a world of deadlines, and 4 years living in a world of secret preparation. For the first time in my life, I had absolutely nothing to do. Diane's trial wasn't the dramatic showdown people expected. Once the State Attorney General's office opened the books on Laney's Light, the house of cards collapsed instantly. they found that over 80% of the donations had been diverted into Diane's personal accounts. She tried to fight it at first. She sat in the courtroom with her planner binder, trying to explain to the judge that the kitchen remodel was a necessary medical infrastructure for my recovery. She tried to claim that the trip to Sedona was spiritual research to help me cope with my trauma. The judge wasn't buying it, or he looked at the screenshots of the text message from the night of the storm, the evidence that had been projected 10 feet tall in that ballroom. And he didn't see a disciplinarian. He saw a woman who had prioritized a curfew over a human life. Diane was sentenced to 5 years for charitable fraud and grand larceny. Because the statute of limitations had passed for the specific night of the storm in our jurisdiction, she wasn't charged with the physical injury, but the judge made sure to mention it during sentencing. "You used your daughter's mutilation as a marketing tool for your own greed," he said. "The only plan you successfully executed was the destruction of your own family." My father didn't go to the sentencing. He sent me a long, rambling letter from the road, apologizing for not standing up to her. He sent a check for the remaining money in his private savings account. I didn't cash it. I didn't burn it either. I just put it in a drawer. Pity wasn't the currency I was looking for anymore. 6 months after the trial, I graduated from university. I didn't have a 4.0 GPA. I had a 3.6, and for the first time, I was okay with that. I'd spent so many years being a perfect machine that being a slightly flawed human felt like a promotion. I moved into my own apartment in the city. It's a small place on the 3rd floor with big windows and a cracked radiator that hisses in the winter. It's not perfectly planned. The carpet is a weird shade of beige, and the kitchen cabinets don't quite close all the way. I love it. I work as a patient advocate for a nonprofit that helps victims of domestic and financial abuse. I spend my days helping people gather their own folders. I teach them how to document, how to track, and how to build a case for their own freedom. I tell them that their binders don't have to be a cage. They can be a ladder. Sometimes new clients look at my left hand when I'm typing. They see the 2 missing tips and they apologize, thinking they've offended me by noticing. "Don't be sorry," I tell them. "They're my reminders. They remind me that I can survive the cold." I haven't spoken to Diane since the night of the gala. She's sent letters from prison, long typed manifestos about how I've derailed the family trajectory and how I need to realign my priorities. She sends me suggested daily schedules for my life in the city. "You're telling me what time I should be waking up and how much I should be saving for retirement." I don't read them. I have a small ritual now. Every time a letter arrives in that familiar, aggressive handwriting, I take it to the park near my apartment. I sit on a bench, look at the ducks in the pond, and then I fold the letter into a paper boat. I set it in the water and watch it float away until the ink runs and the paper dissolves. People always think that revenge is about the moment of the kill. They think it's about the shouting and the handcuffs and the public shame. And don't get me wrong, watching Diane be let out of that ballroom in plastic zip ties was satisfying. It was a weight off my shoulders that I'd been carrying since I was 8 years old. But that wasn't the real revenge. The real revenge happened this morning, when I woke up at 8:15 a.m., not because an alarm went off, not because a planner was screaming at the foot of my bed. I woke up because the sun was hitting my face and I felt like getting some coffee. I spent 45 minutes just sitting in my kitchen, watching the steam rise from my mug. I didn't have a checklist. I didn't have a curfew. I didn't have a single person in the world to whom I owed a second of my time. I went for a walk. I didn't track my pace. I didn't time the transit. I saw a flower shop and decided to buy some lilies, even though they weren't in my budget. I stopped to talk to a neighbor for 20 minutes just because the conversation was interesting. Diane lost her freedom, her house, and her reputation. But what she really lost was the one thing she valued most: my fear. Or she spent 18 years trying to turn me into a clock, and all she ended up doing was teaching me how to wait for the right moment to break. I'm 22 years old now. I have 8 fingers and a life that is completely, gloriously unplanned. I look at the scars on my hand and I don't see a failure to plan. I see the price of my soul. And for the first time, I know that it was worth every cent. So if you're listening to this and you're living your life by someone else's clock, if you're terrified of a doorbell or a deadbolt or a 3-ring binder, let me ask you this. What are you waiting for? Is it the perfect moment? Because I can tell you from experience, the perfect moment doesn't exist. There is only the moment you decide that you're done being a machine. There is only the moment you realize that the person locking the door is the one who's actually trapped. How long are you going to let them keep the time? And when you finally walk away, What is the first thing you're going to do with your own uncounted seconds? I know what I'm doing. I'm going to stay in this park until the sun goes down. Not because I have to, just because I can.